Deputy Minister, directors of the Ministries of Works and Housing and Information, and heads of agencies at the Ministry for Works and Housing. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Honourable Minister, thank you for the invitation to be here to provide an update on development in the housing sector. I recall when I used to invite other ministers to come and do this, and today I am the one who is having to respond to that invitation. Colleagues, I'm going to spend some time doing a very quick presentation on the developments in the housing sector, and then, like the Honourable Minister mentioned, after that I'll take your question. First is to give you a bit of a context of why housing is such a big deal, not just here in Ghana, but all over the world. Housing, as I'm sure you are aware, is not just a necessity. On the hierarchy of needs, it's one of the basic needs of man. But in many respects, it is even a right. People have a right to decent accommodation wherever they are in the world. And decent housing provides security for people, it provides dignity for people, and then it also provides various opportunities for people at the micro level. But on the national level, when you invest in housing or when you pay attention to housing, there are some benefits. At the macro level, it creates a lot of jobs for people. Whenever there's a housing project ongoing, you'll find scores of people who are employed on it. Quite recently, one of the housing projects that we did, the Tesano Security Services Housing Project, we're informed that close to about 500 people were working on that project for the about 3 years that that project was under construction. And today, as phase 2 of the police project around Adenta is ongoing, a lot of them again have been re-engaged there. So as a lot more housing projects go on, a lot of jobs are created in the economy. Also, when housing delivery is attended to, there's a lot of growth in the construction sector of the economy. Whenever you hear the Ghana Statistical Service say the economy has grown by X or by Y, when you go into the data, you'll find that construction is one of the elements or one of the subsectors of the Ghanaian economy. So when you're investing heavily in housing, not only are you creating jobs, you are also stimulating growth in the construction subsector and by extension, growth in the broader Ghanaian economy. When housing projects are also ongoing, you will find that communities are developing. So in the places where some decent housing projects have been put up, all of a sudden you find that that area becomes a developed area. Go to Tema Community 22, where our NHF project is ongoing. Go to Adenta, or go to any of the places where you find housing projects. All of a sudden you find that development is taking place in that area. And then finally, when you pay attention to housing, you stimulate wealth creation for various categories of people. The individual who has bought that house now gets an asset class. He may have financed it with a mortgage or a loan, but very quickly he will have property worth 100,000 or 200,000 or 400,000. That helps him on the wealth creation ladder. He can then now take out value from that property and invest in another business or do other things. So you create wealth for individuals, for the companies that do the construction, the real estate companies, you are creating wealth for them. For the companies in the ancillary construction sector, those doing roads and sewage, etc., you are creating jobs for them. The banks that are financing it, they are also getting more money. So housing also delivers a lot of wealth creation, and that's why it's a big deal, not just in Ghana, but the world all over. Now, in Ghana's housing sector, there are a number of challenges that we are contending with, and I just want to highlight them before I get into the specific presentation of what we've been doing so far. One of the first challenges you'll find in Ghana's housing sector is the question of effective housing delivery programs. So in 2015, Ghana developed a housing policy. The policy spells out how we should go about delivering housing. But under that policy, you need specific programs that will help deliver the housing. One of the challenges that we've had in our republic over the years is that we've not had a lot of effective programs to deliver the housing. Sometimes we start, and then for various reasons, the project stall somewhere along the line. In fact, about 99% of the housing you find today is delivered by the private sector. on their own. So they'll find their land, they'll raise their money, and they'll build. And by all means, by the time they finish, the price will be through the roof. Or people, buy their own land and then take their time over 5-10 years to finish putting up their building. So one of the first challenges is that unlike in other markets where you find a lot of programs to deliver housing in partnership with the private sector, we haven't had a lot of that in times past for various reasons. A second challenge is the challenge of construction finance. If you need to put up a project, these projects that cost about $50 million, $100 million, etc., getting the financing to deliver these projects on time is a big problem. How many real estate companies even can do these large-scale projects or can borrow? And how many banks can on their own here in Ghana finance some of these projects without having to syndicate or rely on other institutions? So construction finance has been a challenge. A third challenge has been affordability. We all talk about affordable housing, but the first part of the question is how affordable is the affordable housing? By the time you buy your iron rods and cement and concrete blocks, affordability begins to elude you. A fourth challenge is the infrastructure associated with housing. So roads, sewage, water, energy, communication, infrastructure becomes a challenge. There are many projects where you notice that they have even gone ahead to build the shell, but you don't find the roads, you don't find the water or energy or other infrastructure. Saglem is an example. And the consequence is that by the time they are done, it becomes difficult to move people into it. Challenge number 5 is that even if you are successful in delivering on it, who is going to buy and how are they going to finance it? Housing is not a product that you usually buy off the shelf, that they are selling a building for $80,000 CD equivalent and you have $80,000 to buy. You usually need financing. You take a loan or something. But in Ghana, we have a very shallow mortgage market. The market is very, very, very small. And so we are not able to get a lot of financing. And if we can't get a lot of financing on the demand side, the real estate companies will do 3, 4, 5, 10, 12, and you don't get the supply that you need. And finally, the regulatory environment. Who is enforcing the building code? Who is ensuring that those who are taking money from clients that we are going to build for you, they're actually doing it? Architectural standards, engineering standards, who is enforcing all of those ones? So those are some of the challenges that Ghana's housing sector has been facing in times gone past. However, the good news is that in the last decade, between 2010 and 2021, we've been able to reduce our housing deficit by about 33%. We used to have a deficit of about 2.8 million units as at 2010. And in the last decade, we are now sitting at a deficit of about 1.8 within this period. It's been mostly delivered by private sector without any support from government. And what it means is that a lot of people are priced out at the end of the day. So what is delivered is still very high. And if you can't afford it, then you have to buy your own land somewhere outside the main cities and spend so many years in trying to put it together. And so at the Ministry of Works and Housing, we've been setting some priorities, focusing on which we believe will help us to bring the housing market into equilibrium, at least within the next decade. Over the last decade, we've done about 33% reduction. We're looking at bringing it into equilibrium within the next decade. To do that, we have agreed on some 8 priorities that we are working with, and my presentation today will mostly focus on giving you an update on these 8 priorities. Some of these priorities are about old things that we were doing already as a ministry, and some of them are new. So just want to quickly take you through them. First, our priority number 1 is to resolve the stalled housing projects. There were some projects that were started, work was ongoing, and for various reasons, they stalled. Priority number 1 is to resolve those ones. Priority number 2 is that for the ongoing affordable housing programs, I mentioned that there are programs under the policy. One of the programs we have is affordable housing program. So for the ongoing affordable housing program, which has some specific projects therein, we want to fast track them and bring them to a conclusion as quickly as possible. Priority number 3 is that we are focusing on initiatives to expand public sector housing. the single largest employer in Ghana is the government of Ghana. And a lot of public servants have housing as one of their benefits. It's also important because it gives them a place to lay their head and therefore to be able to serve the Republic better. But in years gone by, we haven't built a lot of new public sector housing. And so our third priority is to focus on our initiatives that are aimed at expanding public sector housing. Number 4, housing is put on land. So one of the things that we are prioritizing is to secure and expand our land banks at the ministry, because we believe that A, it makes it easier for us to do our own housing projects, and B, where we have to do projects with the private sector, if we have land available to them, it cuts their hustle by a significant percentage. But these 4 are mostly old items on our calendar, which we are prioritizing. And then there are a number of new items that we've put on our calendar since about February this year, when I met with the leadership of the ministry. Number 1, which is number 5 on our list, is to develop a public-private partnership framework to close the housing deficit over the next decade. Remember I mentioned that we've done about 33% reduction in the last decade or so. But our population is growing, and urbanization is also increasing. So if we don't have an aggressive program to close the housing deficit, let's say in a decade, then we could slip back. And so we've been developing a public-private partnership framework to close the housing deficit, and I'll give you some more details on where we are on that. Number 6, it takes a lot of money to do these projects. If we always have to wait for the Minister of Finance to give us some money to, commence a project or to pay for a project, a lot of our projects will get stalled. No wonder some of the projects, some as far back as 10, 15 years are still stalled. So we've had to be working on developing a sustainable financing framework for our housing projects. Number 7, we have started work on a new district housing program, which is one of the programs under the housing policy. And this one focuses on ensuring that we don't just develop housing in the urban areas, but in the rural areas too, we do a lot of housing there. And finally, we are focusing on some legal and policy reforms. So, with your permission, I would like to get into some details and give you specifics on where we are. So let's start with resolving our stalled housing projects. We had about 5 stalled housing projects: Boteman, Asokore Mampong, Koforidua, the State Housing Company's project in Adenta, as well as the Saglemi Affordable Housing Project. The good news is that Boteman and Asokore Mampong, we have already completed them, and now they are fully occupied. But we have 3 more of these 5 to complete, starting with the Koforidua Affordable Housing Project. It was started during President Kufuor's era, and it's stalled since then. It comprises about 342 units of homes. So more or less about 342 families will get an opportunity to live there if we're able to finish this project. 19 blocks, 54 number 1-bedroom apartments, and 288 number 2-bedroom apartments. What we've done is to work with the State Housing Company for them to go through a process of identifying a private contractor who can pre-finance the completion of the work. My understanding is that they've gone through the processes and they have awarded to a private contractor who can pre-finance the works. The contractor is mobilizing to move to site so that work on those 342 units can be completed for our brothers and sisters in and around Koforidua so that they can benefit from it. Today, if you go to Koforidua, I think the new Eastern Regional Hospital is being constructed just around that enclave. And so this is a priority project that we are working to finish, and once we're able to finish it, doctors, nurses, and other persons who live within that enclave can benefit from it. The next is the State Housing Company's project in Adenta. This project was commenced in President Mills's era. It was suspended because of litigation in the era of President Mahama, and the litigation went on for around 10 years. Earlier this year, we managed to get the court injunction lifted so that construction could resume. And by the time we went back on site, there had been a lot of dilapidation. So they had to remove some of the old items, parts of plumbing and electrical and other things had to be removed because of the integrity tests that were conducted. It comprises 4 number 1-bedroom apartments, 36 number 2-bedroom apartments, and 36 number 3-bedroom apartments, totaling about 76 units. So again, in this area, you have about 76 families that can live there once we finish with this project. Work is aggressively ongoing. We've been on site about a couple of times, and the timeline to completion is December 2024. So we are working to finish that particular project. Number 3, which I know many of you are interested in, is the Saglemi Affordable Housing Project. 1,506 units of housing partially completed. Some are uncompleted, some were finished with some fittings in them. So 1,506 housing units out of 5,000 that was commissioned. Remember, the government of Ghana took a loan of $200 million to construct 5,000 units of housing. And the average price at the time we were told was going to be about $40,000 when they were done. As at the time we assumed office, 1,506 units were partially completed, some at the foundation level, some at first floor level, some the shell had been built, some the shell had been completed with fittings in it. But the horizontal infrastructure was missing. So you didn't have water, you didn't have sewage, you didn't have electricity. You had a road network within the enclave. We've been doing some work on completing that one. Cabinet in October 2022 gave approval for this project to be resolved after the initial investigations and the decision made that the persons who had handled the project had some questions to answer in court, because the $200 million was literally all paid out, but only 1,506 partially completed. So it took some years to do the investigation, and then the matter was sent to court. So October 2022, Cabinet approved for the resolution. In April 2024, the technical working group had done some work, and so we issued the request for proposals to the private sector. By May, after about 10 or so companies had come to inspect and had gone on site to receive the drawings, 5 of those firms brought in actual bids. As at September, 2 companies have been shortlisted by our transaction advisors, and they have ferried the details of those 2 companies to us. We've also received executive approval from the President on a structure to use for negotiations to get the best value for the Republic of Ghana. And indeed, last week, the negotiations commenced with an inception meeting. So you will notice all the items we've already done are shaded in green, and the last 2 items are yellow. So negotiations are currently ongoing. We expect that early November, work will resume after a new developer is signed up to go onto the site. Now let me make a quick comment about these 3 projects we are resolving. You'll notice that we are working with the private sector to resolve these projects. A lot of the times people confuse us to say we are selling these projects. I want to repeat for the umpteenth time, we are not selling Saglemi, we are not selling Adenta, we are not selling Koforidua to the private sector. We have invited private sector to participate with their funding and their technology. So they bring in the capital, we use their money and their technology to finish the project, and as was originally intended, these projects would then be sold to members of our worker unions, government workers, etc. And the funding that was brought by the private sector is then received and paid back to the private sector. And whatever investment government also made in it, government recoups part of that investment. So we reiterate that we are not selling these projects. We are working in a PPP framework to complete these projects. The fact that the government of Ghana does not have money in the treasury to advance to us to finish doesn't mean these projects should remain stalled. And so we're being innovative in raising private capital to finish these projects. In Saglemi, for example, we were told we needed about $100 million to finish it. 46 million or so of that is required for the outstanding infrastructure works, energy, infrastructure, sewage systems, and water. And then the remaining 60 or so to finish the uncompleted 1,506. Not to build the whole 5,000, but to finish the uncompleted 1,506. You need about 60 million or so. That's what the Ghana Institute of Surveyors informed us. So if we don't want to wait for government to make that money available, and we don't want the projects to also continue dilapidating, then the best model is to work with the private sector to raise funding for it, and that's what we're doing. Priority number 2 is to fast-track our ongoing affordable housing projects, and we've got 3 specific projects that we are working on. One through the National Home Ownership Fund, and then we've also got a specific project in Pokwase. You remember ground was broken a little over a year ago, and then we've also got the Oppong affordable housing project that is being done by the TDC. So let me give you the specific details. Let's start with the National Home Ownership Fund. The National Home Ownership Fund was established in 2018 as a client fund, as a master developer that gets some money from government and then leverages that to raise some more money, and then they can do some housing projects. They started the NHF estates in Community 22 in Tema, and because of the model that they adopted, they've been very fast in developing those units. The first phase delivered 204 units. It was inaugurated by President Akufo-Addo, I think, in 2020. The second phase, 201 units. That's also been completed, and they are now occupying. And from about April this year, we started work on the third phase, 129 units on the third phase. We started just this April. And if you go there today, we've gone past 65% completion of these 129 units. Some have been roofed, plastered, doors are being fitted there. And it's particularly because of the kind of model that they are using. And I'll speak to that model as we move along, because we believe that that is the model that we must use going forward. So if you go to the NHF estate in Tema Community 22, you find 534, am I correct? 534 units of homes that are there in the first 3 phases. And we are working with them to also do some more. They are doing a few other projects in other parts of the country. We'll speak about that shortly. But under the affordable housing program that we are fast tracking with them, this is one of the success stories. In Pokwase, we are working on 8,000 units of homes. That is a different model. It's not the same as the NHF model. So in the Pokwase model, the government is supposed to build the horizontal infrastructure. That's roads, water, sewage, energy, and telecoms infrastructure. And then the private sector is supposed to use its own capital to build the vertical homes themselves. Currently, work is ongoing. Work is ongoing on the ground infrastructure. It's been advanced. The sewage system is currently being built. They've got works on energy ongoing. And then they've also got works on the water system that they are working on. Once they are able to deliver a significant proportion of that, the private developers, some of who have already started their work, can then be whipped in line to run faster than they are doing with the vertical units, because they are using their own money to build. As you know, no private developer will sink in so much capital if you haven't finished work on the horizontal infrastructure, else you could have the same scenario like what you're having in Saglemi. But government is moving at pace to get the ground infrastructure completed so that the vertical infrastructure, they can also move on it. Number 3 is the affordable housing project being executed by the Tema Development Company, TDC. They are doing a total of 1,904 units. Already they have done 1,072 units, which have been sold to teachers, nurses, doctors, government workers, mostly in Oppong, here in the Greater Accra region. We look forward to commissioning these 1,072 units as quickly as possible. And I remember touring some of these units with you, our colleagues in the media, a few months ago. Just last week, we concluded work on financing and contracting for 832 new units in the Oppong enclave. We call that our phase 4. So in the next about 3 weeks, work will commence on phase 4. Boom, that will bring it to 1,904 affordable units there. So under the umbrella of fast tracking our ongoing affordable housing projects, NHF is running quickly, 534 units. Pokwase, we are running with the ground infrastructure so that there can be some faster work on the vertical infrastructure. And then, boom, we've done phase 1 to 3. We're just about starting work on phase 4 in the next about 3 weeks on the extra 832 units. A few days ago or so, I think I saw some publications on it coming from TDC. Priority number 3 is to provide some more housing for public sector workers. If you deal with our colleagues in the public sector, you would understand that a lot of them, like many of us, go through a lot having to commute from various parts of the capital to where we call the ministry's area to work. There are many troubling stories of public servants who live sometimes as far back as parts of the eastern region and still have to come to work in the central business district to do some work. And so in the days of President Jerry John Rawlings, a program was approved to help deliver some more housing for the public sector workers when it was found that government itself didn't have a lot of money. It was one of the problems I spoke about to be building new units. They called it the Bungalow Redevelopment Program. What they do is that if you have a parcel of land on which there is, let's say, one of these old bungalows, you can enter into an agreement with the private sector where a private developer can redevelop that parcel of land. So they will pull down that one bungalow, sometimes build 4, 6, or 8. Sometimes if they are building apartments, they can build 20 or 50 units so that more public sector workers get accommodation where one person was living on half an acre or 1 acre. Currently at the Ministry of Works and Housing, for our 14 redevelopment projects that are live and ongoing, we are going to receive a total of 609 new homes for public sector workers. 609 new homes for public sector workers. Latebi Okoshi, Nkrumah Flats area, Cantonments, Laboni, and many of those places, Roman Ridge and many of those places, you see a lot of redevelopment ongoing. Sometimes you hear the story that, oh, they say they've sold the bungalow, they've sold the bungalow. Under our redevelopment program, when a private developer comes in, what we do is that we contract them to redevelop at their cost to build 5, 10, 15, 4, 6, 8, depending on the number that the architects will approve for us. And then in return, we yield a portion of the land to that private sector operator as his compensation. If government needs $10 million to build new bungalows for public sector workers and we don't have that money, this redevelopment program, approved in the days of President Jerry John Rawlings, and all the administrations since then have been on it, goes through this process to deliver some more. So currently, we're doing 609 units for public sector workers. So my colleagues in the public sector, fingers crossed, I think from this month, we'll start giving out some of those units. If you look at the work program, some of them are going to be handed over to us this month. So please keep your fingers crossed. We've also got the Security Services Housing Program under the umbrella of delivering more public sector housing. Since 2017, President Akufo-Addo's administration has delivered 1,000 homes to our security services under the public sector housing program. We initially did 368 homes to the Navy at the Naval Command in Tema. And then we did phase 1 of the police housing estate in Kwabenya. That was 312 homes. And then a few months ago, we did 320 units to the Ghana Police Service in Tesano. Currently, we are working on phase 2 in Kwabenya, so we'll be adding some more to it. The military and other services have also brought in requests, and we are commencing some technical work to deal with the designs and the costing so that we can expand what has been done under the Security Services Housing Program. But this is one of the significant things that has been done. 1,000 homes in the last 7 years just for the security services. This is excluding the 1,000 by TDC, excluding the 534 by NHF, etc., etc. And then finally, under our initiatives to expand public sector housing, we've got the Rental Assistance Scheme, the National Rental Assistance Scheme, which was introduced by the Akufo-Addo administration a couple of years ago. Now, what that scheme does is that it makes money available to prepay the rent advance for salaried workers so that they can service that payment on a month-by-month basis. Currently, we are operating, or we've divided the entire country into 6 operating regions for purposes of coverage. And so far, 2,336 Ghanaians or Ghanaian families have benefited from this. 2,336, where their rents have been prepaid, and then they have been servicing it on a month-by-month basis. We've spent about 30.4 million Ghana cedis in this program, and the money gets recycled because the beneficiaries paid back on a month-by-month basis, and then we're able to recycle that money. So it's not expenditure. It's actually an asset creation because it's an investment, and when they pay and they pay the interest on it, the float grows beyond the principal. We have a 100% recovery rate. That's the good news about this program. And what we are looking to do from 2025 as a government is to expand the coverage from the 6 operating regions now to break it down fully into the 16 geographic regions of the country, and then also to increase the budget so that a lot more people beyond the 2,336 can benefit. So colleagues, this is the update on our first 3 priorities. Priority number 4 is our land banks. As I mentioned earlier, all housing is built on land. That's why the lawyers call it immovable property. One of the things that is inimical to the housing sector in Ghana is our land tenure system. If you speak to the private developers, they will explain to you that one of the problems is acquiring land. Sometimes you buy the land and then you have to fight land guards, and sometimes you have to pay 3 to 4 times to different segments of the family before you can even get custody of the land to develop the project on it. As a result, the government of Ghana, through the Ministry of Works and Housing, has acquired 51,000 acres of land across the country to ease the access to land question for developers. So for us as an administration, for us as a government, when we want to develop projects, we have about 51,000 acres of land at our disposal. We are also able to make part of this land available to the private sector if they will go into a partnership with us. So in Pokwase, for example, the 203 acres that we are using is part of this 51,000 acres government land, and we have made it available to the private developers so that they don't have to buy the land or struggle to get title to the land, and they can therefore take away the land cost from their total cost so that the question of affordability, particularly on the supply side, we can go closer to that one. So we have taken steps to secure documentation to a great part of our land assets. We are also physically moving to protect some of these land parcels, especially places where we think there is a threat of encroachment. We are also engaging with the allodial landowners, in particular for places where we haven't completed paying the compensation, and we are commencing processes to pay the outstanding compensations for those processes. But this is a big deal for us because it helps us to take away a major challenge in the housing sector, and we are keen therefore to ring fence our assets. Priority number 5, which is one of the new things we are working on now, is to develop a PPP framework to close the housing deficit. Now, if you go to 2015, Ghana approved what we called a housing policy. And the housing policy in 2015 said that if we keep waiting for the private sector alone to find their own land, buy their own materials and build, affordability will elude us. And so we should work between the public sector and the private sector to be able to deliver on affordable housing. Now, since then, a number of housing programs were developed. First is the Affordable Housing Program. And now we have added to the Affordable Housing Program a district's housing program. So now we're running about 2 programs. The Affordable Housing Program, which focuses on delivering affordable housing in the urban areas and the peri-urban areas, and then a district's housing program, which focuses on delivering what you call low-cost housing in the rural areas. But we are clear that if we're going to get supply-side affordability to be successful, then government has to provide some incentives to the private sector so that it is worth their while to deliver at the price that we want. And so to get affordable housing, whether it's in the urban or peri-urban or rural areas, using whether the affordable housing program or the district housing profile, a set of incentives have been agreed to, and I want to outline these incentives. We've divided them into two. Supply side incentives to ensure that we're able to get affordability on the supply side, and then demand side incentives. So quickly, let me take you through the supply side incentives. First is land, and I've explained that already. We've got in our custody about 51,000 acres of land, which we have taken steps to secure so that we can make it available as our equity that we are making available to the private developer in the project. And the private developer, therefore, doesn't have to buy that land, and it will reduce the cost of the project. Number two is horizontal infrastructure. So we've learned lessons from Saglemi. As a government, we've learned lessons from Saglemi. We've learned lessons from Pokwase. We've learned lessons from Oppong and what the NHF is doing. And so we are partnering with other ministries to deliver the horizontal infrastructure. What it means is that road, water, electricity, sewage, communication infrastructure, even we at the Ministry of Works and Housing no longer need to do it at our cost. Neither does the private developer need to do it at his or her cost. Working with the other ministries, we are prioritizing the budgets of those ministries for these areas where you have large-scale housing projects coming up so that they can deliver those. We're told that it sometimes costs about 30 to sometimes 50% the cost of the project just to do the horizontal infrastructure. And so if we're able to prioritize the budgets of the other ministries, departments, and agencies to deliver on these enclaves where large housing projects are coming, then we don't need to burden the private developer with that budget. Neither does the Ministry of Works and Housing itself even need to spend it. It can be taken care of by our colleague ministries. And already we are piloting this. If you go to Amra here, where the State Housing Company is building about 200 homes, we're already piloting this. So the road network is being done by the Roads Ministry. Energy Ministry is handling the connection of electricity there. It doesn't need to be the cost of the developer to bring in transformers, etc. And then the other horizontal infrastructure being brought in. So between the Ministry of Works and Housing and then the other ministries, we are working to reduce about 30 to 50% of the cost of these projects just by policy collaboration. Number three is to ease the regulatory compliance. So if you leave a developer on his own to comply with the regulations, sometimes the costs end up being a bit high, and the difficulties in going through the administrative processes end up being high. And so learning from Pokwase, for example, between the Ministry of Works and Housing and the Assembly, we're working to ease regulatory compliance by creating a one-stop shop at the Assembly to fast-track all of the regulatory requirements and to ensure that the cash flow requirements are also reduced for the developer so that they can run faster. For those who are adopting what we call appropriate technology, not necessarily using concrete, but looking to use compressed earth or other building technologies, we are looking to ensure that you get some fast-track support from the Rural Housing Department. So particularly for those who are going to do our district housing program, they have access to support from our Rural Housing Department so that they can move faster. We're also working through the National Home Ownership Fund and the unions, bringing on board off-takers for these projects. Why is that important? It's important because if you're able to demonstrate that you have off-takers at the conceptualization, financing is easier because then they can see where the payback is coming from. And so the NHF, that's why I said that in Tema Committee 22, they are using a different model. The model they are using is that once they conceptualize a project and they advertise a project and then they line up off-takers, it is easier for them to get financing from the banks, complementary to what government has made available to them. And therefore, they are able to move faster with these projects. And we are seeking to adopt the same model under their leadership for the other projects. Tied to that is cheaper construction finance. So first is the National Home Ownership Fund itself. If you are coming into our PPP framework and you are going to be financed by a bank that is participating in our NHF financing program, then you are going to get between 40 and 45% discount on the interest of the financing, the construction financing, because of the blended finance approach that we are using. And we are growing that port by working with GIF. I'll speak to it later. You'll notice that tax incentives are in red. So we have proposed tax incentives to Cabinet. But of course, because of our current economic situation, we don't have approval for the tax incentives. But we're keeping it on the table because we believe that moving forward, once our financial situation improves as a country, we should be able to offer tax incentives in addition to these supply side incentives to master developers. If somebody is coming to build 10,000 homes, we should be able to say that on your machinery and your equipment that you are bringing in, we're going to waive taxes on those. Because we are doing same for the other person who is bringing in machinery for pharmaceutical and other products. And we believe that the housing real estate developer who is doing master projects, once our financial situation improves, also deserves some tax benefits. So today we don't have approval for that, but it's part of our incentives document and we'll continue fighting for it. Very quickly on the demand side as well, we've got some incentives. First, to deepen the mortgage market. So we've been engaging with the banks and they've explained to us what they need to deepen the mortgage market. We have met the Bank of Ghana and the Judicial Service that they have asked us to make representations to on their behalf, and we are expecting that that will translate into a deepening of the mortgage market once the issues like regulatory forbearance is upheld by the central bank for them. For the real estate companies that also want to do the rent to own schemes, we've got some incentives for them. I've already mentioned an expansion of the National Rent Assistance Scheme from the 2,300 beneficiaries to a lot more people, and obviously that will help on the demand side. And then the Real Estate Agency Council has now been set up, and as part of their work, they will help on regulating the marketing so that there's real pipeline that developers can look to. Why is it important to deal with the demand side incentives, especially mortgages? Because we don't want people struggling to pay the equivalent of $80,000 or $100,000, because then that is not affordable on the demand side. But if we deepen the mortgage market, you can still buy that same building spread over 20 or 25 years. In fact, with the model that we have piloted with the National Home Ownership Fund Phase 1, it was a CD denominated mortgage. And as a result, recovery has been 100%. Because it was a CD fixed interest rate, CD denominated fixed interest rate mortgage. And we want to be able to, working with the banks, expand that so that all of us can benefit from it. Priority number 6, we're almost done, is to therefore answer the question, how do we have sustainable financing for housing? As I mentioned earlier, today, about 99% of housing is delivered by the private sector. They go to banks or use their own money to build. And so construction finance itself now comes to add. If interest rates are around 25–30%, then at least at the barest minimum, even beyond the cost of the materials itself, you have another 25 to 30% of financing costs that you are paying. So how do we bring that down? We're bringing down the land question, we're bringing down the horizontal infrastructure question. How do we also solve the construction finance question? Now, I mentioned that the National Home Ownership Fund was set up in 2018. Very innovative financing. They get some money from the central government, and then they work with the banks by making that money available to the banks to leverage it to raise some more money with blended finance. The interest rate therefore comes around, and that's why I'm saying that you get about 40 to 45% reduction in that interest rate if it is from a bank that is participating in our program. What we now want to do is to expand it for them to get some more money, because there are years in which government budget is constrained and they may not necessarily get disbursements, and therefore that limits how much financing they can create. And so working with the Ministry of Finance, and I want to thank Minister Amin and his technical team immensely for their cooperation with the Ministry of Works and Housing on this project, we have come up with a model to have the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund set up a sub-fund for housing. And I quickly want to explain to you how this model works. This model is supposed to support two types of projects. A, purely private projects. So if the private sector wants to deliver more housing on their own, they can tap into financing from this model. And then when government is doing its affordable housing project, we can also tap into it. Now, once a project is conceptualized, the project is put into what we call a deal book. That spells out the number of units, the housing, and client requirements, the pricing, schematics, everything. That deal book is then submitted to GIF. So GIF will now receive this deal book that says we need $70 million or $50 million or $20 million for this particular project. As I'm speaking to you now, in Kumasi, Otumfuo gave us about 200 acres of land, and we are very grateful to Otumfuo for that 200 acres of land for affordable housing. They are working on completing the deal book to make available to GIF that this is the cost of that project. And then GIF will issue an investor memo to the housing funds locally and globally. So you have pension funds that are interested. Recently, you followed that Ghana went to Shelter Afrique and got a seat on the Shelter Afrique board and is trying to leverage that to raise some more money. Afrexim Bank and other places. You are then able to raise money into GIF specific to that project. So the investor memo is then made available to the investors, and then they get funding into the GIF housing sub-fund, but it's specific to that project. That blended project financing is then made available for that specific project. And when the project is completed, on the top side, you will find that the project is then sold to union workers and salaried workers. And that sale is backed by the financing from the banks, the mortgages. And hopefully we are looking to do the CD-based mortgages. And the mortgages go back to pay into the fund the money that the investors put into it. So we don't have to wait for government every time to be struggling to find money for this, or for the banks themselves at very high interest rates to fund this. So sales mortgages go back into the housing sub-fund, and then government will now pay into that sub-fund the component of the horizontal infrastructure. So if you are buying the property, you don't necessarily have to pay for the horizontal infrastructure. It is something that government ordinarily is doing, but this fund then pre-finances, and then government over an agreed period finances it. And we think that this is one of the major innovations that will fast-track the delivery of housing, both affordable and pure private projects, so that we can close this housing deficit in the next decade or so. Our final but one priority is the district housing program. Under the district housing program, we are doing two things. We are starting the new district housing program, or what you call the low-cost housing in the districts. We piloted the technology with the construction of Apiatse. So you'll recall that when the Apiatse village was being reconstructed, the Rural Housing Department of the Ministry of Works and Housing worked to deliver the technology, the compressed earth technology. That is a technology, it's a very affordable technology that we are using for our district housing program. And we have concluded work, and we have appointed the National Home Ownership Fund because of the excellence that they have demonstrated with TDC, etc., on Community 22, etc. We've appointed them as our client master developer, and so they are starting the district housing program. We expect that it will help to deliver a lot of housing in the rural districts. We are trying to deal with rural-urban migration. One of the ways to do that is to invest more in the non-peri-urban or urban districts. If you go to the districts out there, one of the biggest problems is that teachers, policemen, nurses, doctors don't want to live there because housing is one of the problems. And so by focusing heavily on the district housing program while doing the affordable housing program, we're able to balance it out. Invest there, it creates more jobs, it develops, creates wealth and value there, but it also provides accommodation for public sector workers who are in those areas. Under our district housing program also, we are resettling the flood victims from the Akosombo Dam disaster. So again, we're using the same technology for the resettlement, and it's the same program that we are doing. We're working with the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development to achieve that. You'll notice on the next slide that in April 2024, we broke ground to start work on the resettlement. I know sometimes people like to create a narrative that government is not doing anything about it. It's not true. In April 2024, I myself, together with my leaders, went on the ground to break ground for construction to start. And many of you, our colleagues in the media, covered it. Alongside that, or parallel to that, we also had to do a validation of who really needed new housing. A lot of people came forward claiming that their buildings had been destroyed and therefore they needed new buildings. So we had to send the whole team, BNI, LUSPA, NADMO to go there and do validation. So the validation exercise is done by, you come and stand by your collapsed building or where it was. The local assembly member, unit committee members can all validate that it's true. This is where your house was. BNI and everybody, we are there. We're able to validate your Ghana card, and then we're able to take. When we finished this exercise, after about 2.5 to 3 months, it took about 2.5 to 3 months to finish, only 40% of those who were claiming that their buildings had been destroyed and needed replacement were true. Only 40%. In fact, it was 38%. We then rounded it off to 40% to accommodate for those whose buildings were not destroyed but will need some support to repair their old buildings. So we say 40% of them were validated. So we are in the process of building 2,225 new homes to resettle our colleagues who were affected by the floods. Now already 115 units are under construction, and they've gone past the 60% mark. Those are the units that I went to break ground for in April 2024. 115 of those units. We have also approved phase 2 of 1,010 units, and we've received the commencement certificate for phase 2. Currently, we're going through the PPA and the land acquisition processes so that actual construction on the phase 2 can happen. And then we have made an application to cabinet, because obviously 1,010 plus 115 is not equal to 2,225. So there's a difference. We've made an application to cabinet to approve a program for us to finish the third phase as well. On the 5th of September 2024, which is 8 days after I appeared before the Assurances Committee of Parliament, remember, we had mentioned that we'll be there in 14 days. Within 8 days, we were there, as you can see to the left side of my screen. Myself and the regional minister were there. We met with the consultants and the contractors and the entire technical team. We were then on ground to inspect the physical building units, and where we even thought that some more attention should be paid to the quality of work. I have written under my hand to the consultants to ensure that the contractors do a decent job there. So we're currently beyond 60% on the first 115 units, and work is about to start on the second 1,010 units. Our final priority, legal and policy reform. So we are reviewing the Rent Act to ensure that there is a better framework for assessing rent, and also, among other things, to ensure that hostels can be regulated. The operation of hostels can be regulated. When you go to many of our institutions and you see the kind of building that is being given out to students as hostels and the amounts that they are charging, it needs to be better regulated. And so, as part of the new Rent Act, we are working on including a regulation of hostels in the new Rent Act to bring a lot of relief and respite to our young brothers and sisters on tertiary education campuses who have to rent hostels. We are also working on completing the latest round of the Ghana Housing Profile. That gives us the baseline data to show the gaps in the housing market, even drilled down to a district level, so that then when you are planning interventions, both for the private sector and the public sector, those interventions are guided by data. And we have also started work on Ghana's first housing report to be put together by the Ministry of Works and Housing, which will, on a year-by-year basis, give the latest numbers on housing delivery, both by the public sector and the private sector. I want to conclude, colleagues, by saying that we will continue to work with speed to achieve these 8 priorities, because we are clear in our minds that housing is not just a right, it is a need, and it holds immense benefits for individuals and for the broader country if we succeed in delivering a lot more housing. I thank you for your attention.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe,
and click on the bell for more updates.